We are now considering a reload on our C category trade for the BC category interaction, or perhaps entering into a new trade at that point. So let's step our data forward 5 minutes at a time and see what happens. Now that is our second bar of the New York session. Of course, this was the first bar. And I've got to say that's a fairly typical opening. We had price come out and take out this previous high. And of course, there was pretty much an equal high over there. So price took that level out and it has turned down again. So price is still engaged in the madness that tends to follow the opening of the New York market. So we're not doing anything yet, but let's keep stepping forward. Our opportunity, of course, is to catch price if it finds support at the level of the signal cycle FLD. Now, if you were a very aggressive trader, you might potentially identify this as a point at which you want to enter to catch the C category trade. However, we've got a target up here, so that's not going to give us very much of a run to our target. So for now, we're not really going to consider doing that. We're going to simply watch price action unfolding and see what happens. Now we have an interesting situation because we have another target. We have our 1 day cycle target. Bear in mind we're trading a sequence cycle of 1 day, and so this target up here could be the end of the bullish move that we are trading at the moment. The interesting thing, of course, is that we are still expecting this cycle to turn bearish. You mustn't forget that. In the back of our mind, we know that we're running on borrowed time here. This is potentially going to turn into a fairly nasty bearish cycle. It could do. And so the run up to the 1 day cycle target might be fairly well achieved, but not very much exceeded. So that's that price level over there. Now, what about this BC category interaction? Did we miss it? Well, we might have. That's the bad news. We might have missed it. And often C category trades are missed, but we're going to keep playing it forward. I would suggest that you should be careful of chasing these C category trades. It's very easy to see price come up like that and want to chase it all the way up to the top. You should rather be patient and wait for those good, clear moves. As mentioned, we might have entered over here, although that doesn't give us very much of a run, although with this new target it's looking a little bit better. So if you had entered there, you wouldn't yet be regretting it, I don't believe. But let's step forward and see how price action unfolds. Now, the markets are beginning to turn just a little bit bearish, and price is coming down towards our signal cycle FLD. But are they really turning bearish? In fact, all that has happened since the US markets opened is we've had a lot of up and down movement, like a bit of a yo-yo. This will often happen at the beginning of a New York session or the beginning of a major session in a market, particularly in a market that is about to turn fairly bearish. You'll get these quick runs up to try to catch trades before the market finally drops. And so it hasn't really turned bearish yet. But of course, if you had entered at this level here, you might be thinking, oh, that's not looking very good for me. But of course, if you had done that, you would have set your stop. As a matter of interest, where would you have set your stop? Would you have set it at the level of this low here? I would suggest not, because we are still expecting support at the level of the signal cycle FLD. In other words, price could very easily come down to the signal cycle FLD and things are going as expected. Nothing unexpected has occurred, and so you would want your stop to certainly be below the level of the FLD and probably some distance below the level of that FLD. And so if you had entered there, you would have had a very wide stop down to at least this level over here, in my opinion, because you want to be careful of the fact that price could come down and tap that FLD. So let's step forward again and see what happens to price action here. Now we have a very interesting bar, and this is a bar well worth paying attention to. Notice how price came down and it just tapped that FLD. Can you see that? It was extraordinarily close to the FLD. It, in fact, ever so slightly touched it. And so now we need to consider a potential entry into this long trade. Now, this bar gives us an interesting opportunity, because if price exceeds the high of this bar, we could apply a sensible stop loss level at the level of this low. And so that is an interesting opportunity, in my opinion. Some of you might want to set an entry at this level over here. But in that case, we're not really catching the support at the level of the signal cycle FLD. And so a tighter entry, in my opinion, is recommended at this point, because we can set a fairly tight stop. If price drops down below this low, then of course that support at the level of the FLD that we seem to have witnessed over here has failed. So let's step forward and see what happens. And you can see that at the close of that bar, price has come all the way back up again, and we have a clear indication of price having found support at the level of the signal cycle FLD. If you had entered at the level of the first 5 minutes, that level was somewhere over here if you'd set a tight entry level. But if you're waiting for the close of the bar, we have a clear indication. And so if price exceeds the high of this bar, or in fact, you could simply set an entry at market on the next bar to benefit from price having found support at the level of our signal cycle FLD. Let's step forward now and see what happens. Price stops us into our long trade, as you can see, if we set our level at that point over there. And so we are potentially in our long trade, and let's see what happens. Price is, of course, heading up, and now we have hit our 12-hour cycle target. Potentially we have taken some profits at the level of the 12-hour cycle target. Our stop, as a matter of interest, will certainly be at this level over here. If you are a trader who, once price hits its target, likes to position the stop below the low of that bar, then you might have even set a very tight stop all the way over there. Let's play price action further forward and see what happens. And in the next bar, we have achieved our 1-day cycle target. There it is over there. And so we have benefited from a second trade from this single trading opportunity. But let me point out a few things here. First of all, our cycle analysis has changed. We are still trading the bounce out of a sequence cycle, which is important to us. If it had reduced the number of diamonds there, then we would have wanted to close our trade at that point, because we are no longer confident in the fact that this was a sequence cycle. But you can see that it has also positioned the longer 5-day cycle trough over there. Why is that? It's because of this strong move out. Is that certainly the 5-day cycle trough that has formed? We do not know that for certain. And so at this point we must turn back to our longer time frame charts to assess the situation. Is there still much in this move? Let's quickly go and look at our 30-minute chart. Here it is over here. And you will notice something immediately. The sequence cycle FLD on the 30-minute chart is indicating that resistance is expected. Now remember, you have to give the sequence cycle FLD a bit of room to breathe. So it's not going to be absolutely accurate in the way that the signal cycle FLD will be. There you can see that very nice support that was found over there on the signal cycle. But the sequence cycle, you need to give a bit more room to breathe. Notice also that the 1-day cycle target on the 30-minute chart is a little bit higher than current price action. So we might still have a bit of bullishness in this move. But notice how the 5-day cycle trough on the 30-minute chart still lies ahead of us. Okay, we're only looking at a bounce out of a 1-day cycle trough at the moment. So the shifting of that yellow cycle, the 5-day cycle trough on the 15-minute chart, is one that we are going to treat with a pinch of salt. We're not going to be absolutely determined that we're going to run this move, but we need to be wary of the fact that price is going to find resistance. We have also achieved all 3 targets on this chart. And as a general rule of thumb, when you have achieved all 3 targets on the time frame that you are trading, it is time to consider bringing this trading opportunity to a close. We have made profits, and it is probably time for us to think about taking our profits and going off and kicking the ball with the dog, or whatever else it is you like to do after completing a successful trading day. So let's step forward and see what is happening here. Price is pulling back just a little bit. It is reaching up and pulling back. You can see it is struggling, but now it has indeed reached up to a new high. And let me quickly bring in the 30-minute chart again. Notice how that new high is at the 1-day cycle target on the 30-minute chart. And let's keep stepping forward. We are reaching up. Now, at this point, we have achieved all 3 of our targets, as I have already mentioned. At this point, I would want to be setting tight stops. If we still have any money in the game, if we still have any trades on the table, then we are going to want to be setting some tight stops here, probably at the low of the previous bar, or you might want to set a 3-bar trailing stop. Perhaps 3-bar trailing stops are quite interesting and often provide you with a good exit. So let's just step forward and see what happens. Price has turned down rather suddenly and rather nastily, having achieved that 1-day cycle target from the 30-minute chart, and it certainly looks as if though this trading opportunity could be over. Price is still bouncing around and giving us the hope that perhaps it's going to rise up to new highs, but notice how it's beginning to lose momentum. And so at this point, you would probably be saying to yourself, well, I sure wish that I had closed that long trade when I saw my 3 targets having been achieved. And so at this point, we're going to close this video. I hope that you're beginning to get a feel for trading the FLD, the identification of the opportunities, your entries, using the targets for your exits, and also identifying the point at which your cycle move that you are trading is potentially done. It's potentially over. The cycle move has been fulfilled. You need to consider setting tight stops and getting out of that trade once those targets have been achieved. In the next sequence of videos in this trading module, we're going to loop all the way back to the beginning and consider some other trading opportunities.